Tonight on Primetime Politics, did he or didn't he?
Did the Prime Minister see the ad before it went out?
Our government is committed to working with all partners in our federation.
Mark Carney faces tough questions at home as the Conservative leader accuses the Prime Minister of approving an ad that killed trade talks with the Trump White House. Coming up, we will walk you through the controversy and we'll speak to Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown about that ad, which has been criticized but also praised for fighting back. Plus, we'll speak with pollster Darrell and veteran journalist John Ibbitson about their new book that says Canada is at a breaking point. And
my expectation is that students and teachers will be back in the classroom on Wednesday.
Alberta invokes the notwithstanding clause to force teachers to end a 22-day strike. We'll get reaction from the teachers' union. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Prime Minister is thousands of kilometers away from Canada tonight, but he cannot escape questions being asked here at home, in particular, whether or not Mark Carney saw and approved of this anti-tariff ad sponsored by the Ontario government. It had been playing in the United States since the American League Championships, and it angered Donald Trump so much that he terminated trade talks with Canada and is now threatening to place an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods. The Conservative leader, for his part, calls this another example of the Prime Minister's failure to advance the trade file. And to talk about this, we're now joined by CPAC's Andrew Thomson. Andrew, hello.
Hello.
Okay, so it was Ontario that developed and rolled out this ad. You know, it wasn't Ottawa. Again, this was Ontario. So walk us through the allegation being made here by Pierre Poilievre.
Well, Michael, this follows what we heard from Ontario Premier Doug Ford yesterday. Doug Ford saying that the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff saw the ads before they aired. And so today we have Pierre Poilievre saying that Mark Carney, in his words, approved that ad campaign against U.S. tariffs. Have a look.
Mark Carney approved the ad, and then he claimed, after the ad started running, that the ad was the reason why no deal happened. So it's time for Mark Carney to come clean. He claims he was on the verge, once again, claims that he was on the verge of getting a deal. Then he approved the ad, and then he blamed the ad for the fact that there is no deal.
Now, Doug Ford says Carney saw the ad and then Ontario moved forward, to quote him. He did not say anything about the Prime Minister approving it. We haven't heard an answer from the Prime Minister's office on this. However, CBC News is quoting an official saying the federal government had no involvement in the ad's production or distribution.
Yeah, and you have reached out to the PMO, so we await on that. But from our understanding, what the PMO is saying is that they were not involved at all with this ad. But that did not stop, the ad from becoming an issue during question period today. What happened there?
Right, so Pierre Poilievre took his argument from outside the House of Commons, from the foyer into the chamber, pressing the government over and over on the Prime Minister's supposed role in Ontario's ad campaign. There was some heated back and forth with the Minister for Canada-US Trade, including this.
I met with auto workers in Windsor over the weekend who are terrified that the Prime Minister's failures are going to cost them their jobs. He looked those workers in the eyes and he said he would have a good deal by July 21st, and he broke his promise. Now he's blaming an ad. He has a duty to say whether or not he saw the ad that he says blew up the so-called deal he had. So will he do the honest thing and answer the question, did he see the ad, or is it actually his incompetence?
Mr. Speaker, just because the Leader of the Opposition keeps asserting the same fake premise doesn't make it real. What is real, Mr. Speaker, is the government of Canada can control certain things. We can control investments that we make in partnership with Canadian businesses and Canadian workers to build a strong economy here. We can work with provinces and territories, as we're proud to do, to defend the Canadian economy and to work with the United States to get an agreement that will be in the interests of Canada, something the Leader of the Opposition will never get a chance to do.
And so, Michael, that's the answer from Dominic LeBlanc. Of course, we'll keep following this story. The Prime Minister, of course, remains in Asia for the rest of this week. He's headed to the APEC summit, and so is Donald Trump.
And as you say, we are following it. Andrew Thomson, thank you very much. Now, the end of trade talks with the White House is causing great anxiety here at home, and that includes Brampton, Ontario, where workers at the Stellantis plant were told they would not be going back to work. The company is moving its assembly of the Jeep Compass to the United States. So yesterday, the Brampton mayor had meetings with federal ministers to talk about efforts to get that decision reversed, and if not, ask what could be done to make Stellantis pay for breaking promises to Canadian officials and to Brampton workers. And with more, we're now joined by Patrick Brown, the Mayor of Brampton, Ontario. Mayor Brown, thank you for taking the time again, and sorry we didn't see each other yesterday.
Well, great to talk to you again.
And you. So listen, you did meet with Minister Joly for the first time yesterday since Donald Trump, made that additional 10% tariff threat and broke off trade talks with Canada. Are you worried about things getting even worse for workers, for people in your community right now?
I think it's likely going to get worse for the auto sector in Canada. We had, obviously meetings with Dominic LeBlanc, Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Evan Solomon, who runs FedDev Ontario, and Melanie Joly, the industry minister, about how we can help workers in Brampton and, how we navigate these very choppy waters. And based on what Stellantis is saying is that there's no business case for auto jobs in Canada as long as tariffs are in place. I think the immediate outlook looks pretty negative, and it's why we're really looking at efforts of how we can create jobs in other spaces as we handle this disruption and chaos from the U.S.
So looking for alternatives at this point, but in the meantime, we have the federal government threatening to take legal action against Stellantis for moving production of the Jeep Compass from your city to a facility in Illinois. You're on record saying you're grateful that Minister Joly is doing this. What outcome do you hope the legal action actually produces?
Well, we actually asked for the legal action, and so more than being supportive, we want this legal recourse to be robust. Stellantis and the precursor company received land given to them in 1985. There was the 2009 Stephen Harper, Dalton McGuinty bailout of Chrysler that has not been paid back. The 2022 retooling funds from Premier Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau, and the production incentives. So this has been a company that has depended on taxpayer generosity, and they've signed contracts, and so they can't cut and run. If we allow them to cut and run, every other auto company that is being bullied by Donald Trump's administration will look at this and say there's no consequence to leave. And so I think this is really a litmus test on Canada's willingness to defend jobs in this space. And so I think it's more important than just Stellantis, than just the Brampton plant. I think this has national ramifications if we roll over. And so speaking with Melanie Joly yesterday, my input was blunt. We need to make this as difficult as possible. We need to use every tool at our disposal to make sure that the agreements that they have signed and the benefits they have received are honored.
So what does that look like? Maintaining, and I know, because I believe the letter of the agreement says it would maintain the footprint that was in Brampton going forward. Is that what you're looking for? Are you looking for financial compensation and payback for the investments? What exactly do you hope this produces?
Our first goal would be Stellantis would say, okay, we're not going to be bullied. We're going to accept that we've signed legal contracts that promise production at this plant. And so in terms of the product, I am neutral to that, but I want work there. I want a vehicle that is assigned there for the 3,000 experienced, trained Unifor Local 1285 auto workers who are ready to roll up their sleeves and get back to work. And so that's the first wish, that a product is returned. If they don't return a product, then there has to be compensation for Canadian taxpayers. You can't accept, a handout and then run from the obligations that came with that handout. It's all tied to production. It's tied to production in Canada. This company would have been in financial chaos if it wasn't for the 2009 bailout, and their future looked grim in 2022 when the Canadian government and the Ontario government came to the rescue. So there is a legal obligation they have.
A legal obligation, but we have seen some reaction to it, though. Of course, we saw that anti-tariff ad that was put up by the Ontario government a couple of weeks ago. We've also seen the quota put out by the federal government, essentially saying that assembled cars from the United States, only a certain amount will be brought into Canada. After that, everything else would be tariffed. Are you concerned that actually will inspire U.S. car makers to pull out of Canada altogether, since we already saw Donald Trump calling off trade talks over those two issues?
I want U.S. automakers to know how significant and how high the stakes are. If they think they can just cut and run from Canada and leave a very minimal presence, there is consequences to that betrayal of Canadian taxpayers. And what I mean by that is largely Canada is filled with North American-built cars. The U.S. automakers enjoy a massive market share in Canada. We are the largest export market for American vehicles. And that could change. I'm sure there are car companies right now smiling with glee at the chaos that Donald Trump has created, whether it's Japan, South Korea, or China. There'd be other automakers interested in setting up production in Canada if American cars could not be sold here. It would change the market. And so if Donald Trump really wants to put up a trade wall with Canada, it would devastate his own production, because we are his largest export market. That's why I think a lot of us are scratching our heads. And does he really know the consequences of this divorce that he seems to be pushing?
I'm thinking back to when GM threatened to shut down the Oshawa plant, and what we saw there was the union fight back, essentially spread a message to Canadians: do not buy GM because they betray Canadians. Do you think this is an effort that you're willing to pick up from your community, for this country, in regards to Stellantis?
Well, I certainly don't think anyone should be buying Stellantis product if they cut and run. If they're going to have this betrayal of Canadian taxpayers and legal agreements that they have signed, then yes, we should opt out of Stellantis. And so, we're not there yet, but I think we're pretty close to seeing a campaign like that emerge. We're hoping that sanity will prevail at Stellantis, and they won't be bullied and intimidated by this U.S. administration, and they'll honor the legal agreements they've signed. But I think we're at the point where it could get a lot uglier for them in terms of how Canadians are going to react to their product. And I would not be surprised to see a campaign like that emerge in the near future.
Now, I mentioned briefly the anti-tariff ad that was run by the Ontario government in U.S. markets that has now been suspended. Ontario Premier Doug Ford hoping that by suspending the ad, it gets trade talks back on track vis-a-vis Canada and the United States. But do you support that kind of anti-tariff campaign? Do you support that kind of ad? Because the Ontario Premier has been criticized by other premiers for moving forward with that.
Well, I support the campaign speaking truth in the political debate of the United States. A lot of people are silenced by the Trump administration, or scared to speak up. I've spoken to a lot of elected officials in the U.S. who, the temperature there is challenging. They don't want to go against the U.S. president, even though the history of the Republican Party has been that of free trade. Ronald Reagan viewed tariffs as taxes. He viewed it as a cancer on American prosperity. And so these are all Ronald Reagan's words. He might have chosen the parts of the speech to share, but these are Ronald Reagan's words, his ideas, and his general philosophy. And I thought it was powerful. I think it's made a splash. And the status quo wasn't working. We had no deal. We had to shake things up. And I think Premier Ford has certainly shaken up the conversation. And hopefully, Donald Trump understands now that Canadians don't take this theft of our jobs and our economy, lying down.
Mayor Patrick Brown, always appreciate the time. We'll speak again soon. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Is Canada at a breaking point? Now, that's the question explored by pollster Darrell and journalist John Ibbitson in their new book of the same name. In an upcoming interview for my program Profile, I did speak to the two of them about the challenges they say are pulling the country apart. Among them, generational divides, housing, and regional alienation. Take a listen right now to an excerpt from that longer interview for Profile. In it, the two suggest one solution that might address some of the societal strain they identified. In particular, building the kind of houses young people actually want to invest and grow in, rather than the higher density condos city planners say they should.
So yes, first of all, and as COVID taught us, in case there was any doubt, most people grew up in a multi-bedroom house with a backyard. Guess what? They want to live in a multi-bedroom house with a backyard. They don't want to live in densified downtown urban environments. Some people do. But the idea that we can accommodate all the demand that we have for low-cost housing through densification, it's not going to work. For one thing, there's just so much opposition to it within the neighborhoods where the densification is supposed to take place. So most of us grew up in suburban houses on the edges of cities. And the best way to reduce the price of housing is, first of all, to reduce the charges on the housing, but then second of all, to keep sprawling. If you're going to build a bunch of multi-bedroom houses with backyards, you have to build them in the farmland on the edges of the cities. And this sort of Laurentian politically correct opinion that sprawl is evil and has to be contained and the environmental benefits costs are too high. Well, the social costs of depriving young people of housing are even higher, and we have to address that.
Mm-hmm. Now, another breaking point, we only touched upon it briefly because you mentioned the regional alienation in this country, and not just Quebec, but increasingly so from the West. And in the book, there is a line that reads, "We need to double down on the country we actually are, suburban, as you say, but also increasingly Western resource rich. That's not a weakness, that is our competitive edge." How does that address a breaking point in your mind, Darrell? How is embracing this increasingly Western resource-based economy something that would address the breaking point and essentially keep the country from being broken apart?
Yeah, well, the Laurentian consensus, the Laurentian elite view of the Canadian economy is one.
And by that you mean Central Canadian?
Yeah, yes. well, we came up with it. So I mean, John actually came up with it. I mean, so
Central Canadian political and business elites.
Okay.
Yeah, so they basically there's Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and then every place is flyover after that. And the truth is, in the Canadian population these days, there are more people who live west of the Ontario Manitoba border than live east of the Ontario-Quebec border. So actually the most rapid growth that we're seeing is east of or west of Quebec. It's the suburbs of the city of Toronto and some of the other places like Ottawa and some of the other London, Ontario and places like that, and then in Western Canada. And so what's happening is the economy is shifting in that direction. And the truth is, when you sit down, I mean, anybody who, say you landed from Mars and you didn't have any political views on what was going on in Canada, and you just simply went on Statistics Canada's reports or anybody else's reports on Canada's trade statistics, you see what it is that the world buys from us. And it's not, cluster of technology clusters and that kind of thing. It's oil and gas, it's lumber, it's agriculture. They're the basis of our economy, and frankly, they're mostly in Western Canada. So our point is that we need to recognize those economic realities, and instead of trying to fight with Western Canada about what should be our economy, we should all be taking advantage of the fact that that they're quite successful in this and assist in making them successful. So the world wants what Canada has, but it just doesn't want, I think, what Ottawa bureaucrats think that our country should be.
Okay, that interestingly echoes a bit of what we've heard from Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, when he talks about the world wants what Canada has. How do you put that into practical effect?
Well, first of all, get government out of it, make government helpful, but get them out of it and let markets operate and build the infrastructure so we can actually take advantage of this. And yes, this means pipelines to Tidewater. And this is the responsibility of the federal government to make happen. And ultimately, that's what we're going to have to do if we're going to find trading partners other than the United States. Reality just woke up south of the U.S.-Canadian border, and that reality is not one that's going to favor our trading position with the United States. And if we're going to diversify, we can't do it without the infrastructure to do it.
But also, we have a country in which a large chunk of the country doesn't see itself reflected in the federal government, and that's especially true of Western Canada. They look at Ottawa and they see an Ottawa
and through the history of Western Canada.
And it is from 1905 when the provinces were founded. They look at Ottawa and they see a place that looks at them as a colony, that looks at them as a region. That looks down on them. And if the country is to be rescued, we need to have all regions of the country believe that the federal government is their government.
And that was journalist John Ibbitson, and with him, pollster Darrell. The two of them have a new book out. It is called Breaking Point, the subject of which is featured in my next episode of Profile that will premiere here on CPAC on November the 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Well, to Alberta now, where the UCP government invoked the notwithstanding clause early this morning, not over a constitutional matter, but over a back-to-work order that ends a teachers' strike that had been going on for 22 days. With the clause invoked, the teachers' union cannot challenge the order in court, but Danielle Smith says she has heard the teachers' concerns. She is striking a working group to investigate, while ultimately getting kids back into the classroom.
We've never had 51,000 workers off the job at the same time. We've never had every school, public, Catholic, and Francophone, off for 3 weeks. We've never had the circumstances that we faced in the last 3 years of 80,000 new students being added. We've never had the complexity that we have in classrooms, which require not just teachers at the table, but it also requires education assistants at the table and trustees and superintendents. That's why we want to address the issues that came up during the strike. We want to just address them in a different way, a more nuanced way, in a more directed way. That's what we're going to do.
Well, Jason Schilling is the president of the Alberta Teachers Association. He joins us right now. Mr. Schilling, thank you for the time.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So the Alberta Premier, she was not in the legislature last night when this back-to-work legislation passed, but we did hear from Danielle Smith essentially saying that she was moving on this because the strike was, and this is her words, causing irreparable harm to children. What do you say to that?
Well, I know that the strike had been going on for 3 weeks, but the government had opportunities to help negotiate a settlement there that would have worked for parents and teachers and students. We had put forward some suggestions on how we can move forward to address the complexity that we're seeing in our classrooms that government just didn't want to move on, and therefore they felt it was appropriate for them, I guess, to evoke the notwithstanding clause and impose a settlement on teachers in Alberta.
Okay, can you build on that? You know, I've heard the word complexity used when describing the situation that teachers are facing in the classroom right now. But for a national audience that has not really been part of this debate day to day, what complexity was making it difficult to do your job that needed the strike action?
Well, that's a great question. In Alberta, we are the least funded school jurisdiction in all of Canada, and they have been so for about a decade. That systemic underfunding has caused a lot of cracks within the system. So we have overcrowded classrooms. We like to say 40 is the new 30 here. But you have students within those classes that might have English language learning needs. They might be refugee students who are just new to Canada that need extra support, special needs students who need one-on-one educational assistance, but we don't have those supports in the class as well. But we also have, the average student who's in there that is looking for attention that they deserve to have as well. So all of these complexities in a classroom of 30, 35 students is overwhelming for teachers to try to meet the needs of all of those students. And therefore, we keep seeing kids fall through the cracks. And teachers essentially had said, we have had enough of this. We need to do better by our students and by the people who work with them as well.
Now, the UCP government, had offered to hire 3,000 new teachers, 1,500 new EAs. How would that not have addressed the issues that you're trying to raise here?
Well, we know that when we were through negotiations that we had proposed actually a student-teacher ratio. The compromise at some point through the negotiations became hiring 3,000 new teachers to deal with some of the hot spots that we see in the province. But that's a drop in the bucket of what we need here in Alberta. We have seen a huge increase of students enrollment over the last couple of years, and government has not kept pace with hiring teachers to accommodate that. So we are the least funded in terms of funding, but we also have the highest student-teacher ratio right now in all of Canada. And government, that's part of their job is to hire people to work within the public service, and they've not been keeping pace with that. And so this promise within this negotiated or the settlement that came down yesterday is a start, but it's not enough.
Okay, listen, let's also talk about that. You talk about, again, this settlement that was voted on yesterday, not negotiated, put onto the union. We did hear Danielle Smith say that the issues and the concerns that you and your union have raised will not go ignored. She is striking a class size and complexity task force. She says she hopes that teachers and teachers' assistants will play a role in the work of that group. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my expectation, excuse me, my expectation would be that we don't have a role. We're a partner within that. We are dealing with classroom complexities that, not every politician in the legislature is going to understand because they're not teachers. They don't work at school. So I think it's paramount that those who are working on the front lines, teachers, educational assistants, so my colleagues from QP, would be partners on this conversation and not just people who might participate.
Now, the plan, to my understanding, is that you and your union will now look to legal alternatives to challenge the bill because, again, you are being legislated back to work. This was not negotiated. This was not even an issue that was brought to arbitration. You are basically told you have to go to work, and we're invoking the notwithstanding clause so that it cannot be challenged. So what can you do to challenge it?
Well, given that we just saw the bill be tabled late yesterday afternoon and then wasn't passed until early morning hours around 2 a.m., we still need to do some work around the analytics, how to analyze the bill and just how we're going to approach with it legally. But we will leave no stone unturned as we look at this.
And my understanding is that you're not alone in this, that the Alberta Federation of Labour also wants to respond to the bill as well. Can you walk us through what the discussions have been like on that so far?
Well, I have not been able to connect with them today. It's been a pretty busy day, but I do know that the other unions are looking to support teachers in this because we know that using the notwithstanding clause with teachers in this capacity of negotiations, that the government will then be emboldened to use it in other aspects of the public service. So AUPE, QP, the nurses, they're all watching this very, very closely, as well as private sector unions, to see just how this will play out, because if it affects one of us, it affects all of us.
Now, as you said, you and your members have been on strike for 3 weeks now. You're now being legislated back to work. Was it worth it?
Well, I think that teachers have stood up in a way that we've not seen in this province for a long, long time. They were accused of walking out on their students, but what they really did was stand up for them. And I am immensely proud of my colleagues in the work that they've done because they fundamentally changed the conversation on public education here in the province. We have petitions out there about private school funding that should be going to public dollars used for private school funding. We have parents and community members who are engaged now in the conversation and will not be quiet until the government starts funding education properly in this province. And so I know a lot of my colleagues were rightfully so upset, frustrated about what happened yesterday, but they have been able to change the tone of government. They've been able to push them in a way. For instance, now they're going to start collecting class size data again, which they stopped doing in 2019. That is a product of this strike. And so I think that teachers have awakened public education issues here in the province that we will not forget about for years.
Jason Schilling, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Yep, you bet. Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.